Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone in between, to the Outer Circle Inner Stillness podcast. Conversations about spirituality, sexuality, sobriety, and the inner life. And somehow that got turned into a movie review. Yeah, we've been talking about some movies that seem to say something about the inner life or mental health or trauma or addiction or things like that. Things that are very, what we determine are movies that say something about the human experience that would be useful in some sort of a growth healing context. That's loosely how I'm interpreting this and making this work. Anyway, yes. Here again with Caleb Keller. You've heard him before. How you doing, Caleb?
Yo.
And and you were saying, and I was preoccupied because I was frustrated with the internet, but you were saying you are now certified with EMDR or almost certified?
Ooh, I'm so close, fam. So next month, I'll be doing my last couple of hours. And then I was telling Reese that I will be no longer a Jedi Padawan of EMDR related things. I will be a Jedi Knight. I will be EMDRIA Institute of something certified. So I won't say EMDR trained on stuff anymore. It will say EMDR certified. So yeah,
that's really exciting. I've worked with some EMDR practitioners in the past, and they always have exciting things to say, and they talk a lot about the brain and trauma and everything, and it's super fascinating. So if y'all are looking for a good Emder Knight, EMDR practitioner, Caleb is a wonderful fella. You should look him up. So,
anyway, thanks.
You're welcome. And sadly, you're not paying me for that either.
All this unpaid labor.
It's okay. Anyway, so we are here talking about a movie. This is the film The Namesake, and I'm gonna see if I can look up what year it was made. No, I'm not.
2007. I got
2007.
You.
Thank
2007.
You. Yes. So part of what brought this up, so I saw it years ago and I really loved it. But then very recently I took a continuing education course about the ethics related to like intercultural awareness and culture and diversity and racial awareness and microaggressions, and I think motivational interviewing also. There were a lot of things. I also took a lot of trainings at that time because I was cramming. Long story. But I was reminded again of this film, and they played a clip from it, and I thought I recall that film really fondly. It was really fun. So now I've roped Caleb into seeing it. Had you ever seen it before? I mentioned it.
Truth be told, no, I had not. Yeah, it. We'll get into it, but no, I really enjoyed it. It just showed that I'm in support of slower paced movies. Almost always they hit harder than when they're too fast paced. So
yeah, yes,
soundbite right there. My little tweet about it.
I appreciate it. I'm already in sync with you because yes, I love this pace of the movie. So, for those of you who have not seen it, with a little bit of viewer discretion, I would highly recommend it for a lot of audiences anyway. Very briefly, a brief summary of the plot. So we are doing spoilers, even though it's an older movie. We are given this official spoiler alert. So if you haven't seen it and you want to see it first, go watch it and then finish this conversation.
Don't add us.
Right. Yeah. So the film starts in India, with Ashoke and Ashima. He's a college student at the time, and she's learning to be a singer, and they are married in an arranged marriage, and shortly after they immigrate to the United States or Canada. New York.
US, yeah.
Yes, because later Gogol says he's from New York. Anyway, so so just prior to their meeting, Ashoke survives a train wreck. a literal train wreck,
Yeah, yeah.
an
He's not
actual
joking.
derailing of the
It
train.
actually
Yes,
happens.
it actually happens. Yes, and so and at the time he's reading a book of stories by his favorite author, the Russian author Nikolai Gogol, and for a variety of reasons, after they immigrate and they have their firstborn son, he names his son Gogol. And there's a dynamic in Indian culture and how babies are named. There's like a name, there's like a good name and then a legal name, and they usually they wait until the kids are like 6, and then like the grandmother names them. But in this case, the grandma was across the world, so the American hospitals had everything, had to rush everything. Anyway, and such begins the microaggressions. But
I was
anyway,
literally going to say, yes, you were speaking
oh,
of microaggressions. We
oh
got
my
them
goodness,
galore. We got so many out
so
there.
much, so
So
much
much.
in this movie. Anyway, so in a way, so the story, I would say already, the story is not a typical hero's journey story arc. It starts off very gentle, very slow build. It's much more here's like the life and times of this family, and so we watch Ashoka and Ashima as they first get married and then raise children and then grow older, and how their story, how their relationship interplays. And at the same time, we're watching, in particular, they have a son and a daughter. Their older son um, is named Gogol, which, if you can imagine, in American culture and American schools, gets made fun of quite a bit. And
Yes, sir.
so
Nice.
right, and so Gogol is this young man who is now sorting through. I'm of Indian heritage, but I'm living in America, and how do I work? How do I love? What do I call myself? And he goes through several phases of like identity formation relative to his culture, and uh, we see some high points there. Um, uh, yes, Gogol. I guess I should outline like a little bit more of the story because we'll be talking about it. Um, so they're growing up. um, when Gogol is just graduating high school, the family takes a pilgrimage all back to India. So they all get to visit India together that one time. They come back. Gogol says, I'm going to after seeing the Taj Mahal, he's like, I'm going to go into architecture. So he does. There's a passage of time, and now we catch up with them. And, Gogol's now going by Nick. That was his other name, Nicole. So he's dating a white girl, Maxine, and very distant from his family, very disconnected, very much brushing them off. His mom was worrying about him, like, why doesn't he call? Why doesn't he visit? And things like that. And his dad's just kind of going about his business. They have some interactions. Um, a lot of things really kick into gear when Ashoke, like the patriarch, he leaves to go teach in some other place for a semester, and while he's there, he has a heart attack and dies very unexpectedly. And so that becomes a catalyst for a lot of personal growth for Ashima as she now goes through a mourning process, but also for Gogol as or he's going by Nick at the time, and then um, he comes back. He very much comes back into his culture at that point. He comes to his mother. He fully participates in all of like the ritual and tradition surrounding death and burial and mourning, and
Shaves his head.
yeah, and she shaves his head as a symbol of that. And then shortly after that, Ashima does the mom thing, and she sets Nikolai Gogol up on a date with Mushimi, who's another Indian woman who they had briefly met back in childhood, and now he met her again, and she's all beautiful and sexy, and they have a kind of a whirlwind romance. They get married shortly after. She has an affair, and they divorce, and that's kind of like where his arc ends, where he ends on this note of like, well, now I'm really free. And at the same time, Ashima has decided, I'm going to go back to India and start singing again, and I feel free. And meanwhile, the daughter who is like kind of a footnote in the story. She's just like been quietly like living her life, quietly marrying a guy, and just like kind of having a drama-free life, like in general. Um, and I actually think like there's like quite a bit more significance to her than the movie gives her. But anyway, so those are our main characters. There's Oshoki and Ashima, who they have they're the starters, and then Nick or Gogo, who's kind of our main protagonist, sister Sonia, and Gogo's the from partners, white girl Maxine, and then Bengali lady Mushima, and that's briefly what the drama is. So anyway, I'm gonna stop talking for a bit because I would love to hear from Caleb. So starting with like as a movie, as a story, as world building, as cinematography, what do you like? What do you not like?
Yeah. No, I'll kind of do 5,505
Okay.
as far as our vantage point. So the 5,000 foot level, kind of like I was talking before, I love slow paced stuff. I love slow burns because it kind of enables things to breathe in a way that sometimes an hour and a half to 3 hours, it's about how long movies tend to be. It actually gives them space to breathe, and it makes things more than just this is an arbitrary scene of dialogue. This is an arbitrary like fight scene because that's what you want when you watch movies, right? This felt like it was deliberate. It was taking its time. There's not a wasted frame. And I'm glad that you mentioned cinematography because this movie's lighting was like excellent.
Oh, yes.
So one of the things that Reese and I were also doing a Frankenstein pod, woo,
Yay.
and the novelized version of it, the OG version of it. So one of the things that he and I have talked about is kind of what these different mediums of arts, what they can offer, right? Because there's some people that are more on the literary purist side of things. That's the true art form. That's the true way you tell stories. And I, truth be told, when I was growing up, I watched a lot of movies. I'm like an average American, right? I think it was Tarantino that said it's the working class opera. It's the working class stage theater. And I was like, yes, actually, I love that. Yes. So with that being said, one of the things that a good movie does, which this good movie does, is shift the way that you're interpreting a scene by the lighting. So when we're first with Ashoke, that's how it's pronounced. Just want to make sure. But anyway,
Sure.
when you're with, yeah, when you're first with, he's essentially the father character, right? The one of the primary, again, like you're saying, it's kind of the three. The family itself is the primary character. We'll get to that. We'll cross the bridge when we get there. But one thing that was really excellent is in the literal train wreck scene, the lighting is a certain way, and as a trauma. So we mentioned EMDR earlier. As a person who does a lot of trauma work, this film did a really good job of illustrating when Ashoka was having not necessarily flashbacks, but he was having trauma stuff happen for him. So there were a couple scenarios. I believe it was when they were at the Taj Mahal, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. The whole family was there, all four characters, mom, dad, son, daughter. And the lighting was, and again, maybe you can kind of explain it or kind of give it the listeners a better idea too, but it was just slightly muted. It wasn't really, really dramatic because this movie's very
Mm-hmm.
subtle, just to its credit. But it was just changed enough that you were like, oh, something different is going on here. Some different implications happening here. Go for it.
I think that yes, if I'm remembering right, all of the scenes in India are shot with this very like warm light, like almost soft focus filter. And as I'm thinking about it, it lends this very like cozy, nostalgic feel to India, which and the brilliance of it really plays into the role that India plays in the story. Like especially, I would say the most for Ashima. She's the character who I think most closely clings to her culture, and so the sense of the nostalgia, Indian culture, the motherland. I don't think they call it the motherland. Forgive me. Um, but but yeah, but it's a trick of the lighting, and I know I was thinking too. So yes, the train wreck scenes are a very distinct filter, which from a storytelling mechanic, time travel is difficult to do well and always has to be like clearly delineated, like when it's
Yes.
happening and everything. So in this case, they use filters as part of that. So yes, it was very good. But
Well, and on that note, so the muted capacity, you kind of assume that it's only for Ashoka and his the train wreck oriented scene, right? But then it's beautiful because what happens is with Gogol's character, I want to say, yeah, essentially right after he hears about his father's passing, then the same color palette, which again, as a trauma therapist, I'm like, well done, well done. And
yeah,
the other moment that it does this as well is even more subtle, but it was excellent. Is when so Reese was mentioning earlier that eventually he falls for like the proper Indian gal and like did it the proper arranged marriage way, but then both characters they kind of mirrored each other pretty well. They paralleled each other pretty well. Assimilate, not assimilate, merits of which it was really good. And essentially, his new wife, she was sort of like I assimilated to French culture. I honestly really love French culture. I met a French man, and then there we go. So the lighting on that is the same. It's also that same muted color. So
yeah.
as soon as he hears that, you're recognizing, oh, this is why the color palette is this way, because he's just experiencing that betrayal trauma. He's just experiencing that anguish, that you know knife in the heart kind of moment, like it is for. I
Mhm.
mean, Reese and I can both attest that when clients talk about infidelity, it's up there as far as traumatic events. It is grueling.
One of the most
So
painful things. Yeah.
that was just super well done. Um, subtlety, subtlety is
Mhm.
everything.
Yeah.
And then I'll pass it to you.
Yeah. Well, you're talking lighting, something in color too, and so some of the scenes are shot in India, some are shot in New York, some are shot in like New York in the wintertime. And one of my favorite scenes was it's going so there's Ashoka and Ashima's wedding, huge color palette, explosion of like red and orange and pink and all of the things, like warm, very warm culture thing. And then like there's like a couple small shots, but then very shortly it's here's Ashima waking up in a snowy winter. Such a dramatic color shift. It's like, white and gray and a little bit more white and a couple more shades of gray and some like tan brown, and she's, wrapped in her one very, very much too thin, wrap. That's like the only splash of color in this white wasteland. And just like the wilted look on her face is so perfectly capturing like depression. Um, not hard to say if it's like a clinical depression, how we understand it, but you can definitely tell she just had her world wrecked. She opted into it. She's not like scared. I mean, she's not being coerced. She's got the support of her husband. Great. But still, she just left her whole world. She's having to deal with snow. She's having to learn language and deal with all of this stuff. And it's just like when we expand trauma to just the when we open our understanding of trauma to know that it is a time when the system is overwhelmed for a prolonged period of time, we can recognize, oh yeah, immigration definitely qualifies, and she's going through a lot, and uh, again, thankfully for her, she has a secure figure to be with her, which I think is probably what saves her in a lot of ways. But you can also tell, again, the way that part of how she adapts to it is she clings to what she can. I mean, she functions pretty well, but she very much clings to her culture, and I feel like it's kind of conspicuous, even like the way that she dresses. Like she always dresses very conservatively. Like there's a couple of shots where like I think it's called the sari, but like her robe is just like draped and like dangling and like hanging and it almost looks like her movements themselves are kind of like encumbered by her traditional clothing. Like as she's like working in the library and like doing a bunch of things. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So on the note of you rightly point out that trauma is Um, it both can be very large and it can be very small. It's when you get past a certain level of processing, and then suddenly it's a form of trauma. So, like you're saying, you move across the world, kind of traumatic.
Yeah.
You're exposed to a new culture, it's kind of traumatic. You're removed from your home, and we could go down the list, right? There's like so
Mhm.
many different things. Um, there's another note I had on that. Oh, one thing that stood up to me is so she's acclimating to that. Very difficult, right? Great shots on her face. The actress, she did a great job too. Subtle, but like you said, very depressive, very sad, kind of to be expected. Then she writes a card home. Everything's
Oh
great
my.
here. Everything is wonderful. I'm so blah, blah, blah. And in my mind, I'm like, this is textbook like immigration situation where you have to express to everyone that's like, you're going to make it in America, right? We have all sorts of context. We could talk about that, right? But essentially opportunity, right? And the father character Ashoka, he talks about that all the time. Opportunity, right? Gogol and Sonia, they'll be able to do what they want. They can study what they want. But for her, she's like, she has to sort of not necessarily in line with Indian culture per se, but more about like wanting to convey a certain kind of reality that might not be congruent with their actual lived experience. So she's saying, "Oh, it's wonderful here. Oh, it's I'm loving it here." And we're watching as she's writing it, and we're like,
Yeah, she's not happy.
She's not." But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking too, something I can't speak to in a lot of detail. I'm in no way connected to Indian culture. My heritage is much different, but we could wonder about, well, what are the narratives? What are the expectations? What are the spoken or unspoken rules about how to be? Like you could kind of see this in how in the first meeting between Ashima and Ashoke, where like it's very much the eyes down, don't smile, Indian bride never smile, uh, which is a reference to another movie, which is really fun. Bend it like Beckham, a much more lighthearted exploration of Indian culture with that. That's fun. But anyway, but they're not the way they do eye contact, the way they do affection. There's tradition there, and there's a whole list of cultural shoulds. Like this is just normal in our culture, and you really see that played out. Very much in contrast to like much later when now Gogol and Mushimi are having their first date. They're alone, no parents, they're smoking, they're drinking. Like I don't think they have sex for the first date, but like I mean they jump into it pretty quick, that sort of thing. But like what you notice this idea about opportunity, I remember making a note about that too, because what did I say? Uh, Ashoka, yeah, he's very much like I want to give my kids opportunity, America, the land of opportunity. Whereas Ashima, she seems to much more prefer. She wants to give her kids family and tradition and home. Uh, so I'm like, okay, well, I mean, either right or wrong, but they're definitely different emphases that would make one's decisions different. So
I really loved their relationship. It was really beautiful. It was really sweet. Um, it was also normal, and it had conflict, and it had tension. It felt like it was fully formed. Um, and this part I might say just because I am an American person, so when it happened, I kind of chuckled. But I believe they were at the Taj Mahal, um, and I think their kids, who were teens at this point, were off doing their own thing, and then they had a little stroll alongside a river or lake or something like that, and they were kind of getting sentimental, right? And so you're sort of speaking to, again, I'm obviously not of Indian descent. I'm very white descent. So bear that with it, keep that in mind as I examine in my own way. But what I notice is that um, she said something to the effect of, you want me to do the American thing and say that I love you, huh? And I thought that was really sweet because I never doubted that they loved each other, and they never said I love you. It was a really interesting kind of like, that was really tender, that was really sweet. And as an aside, it just was a really good love story because, again, subtlety. I just love when we're first meeting Ashima and she's like walking up the steps and everyone's like, you're gonna meet him, you're gonna meet him. for the arrangement portion of it. And
Mm.
she walks up, she kind of pauses, she looks down, and she looks at his shoes. It just was such a good way to have storytelling and observe these really subtle things. And then, fast forward, and then we have this really sweet moment that's a callback where she's like, I just liked your shoes. And that's kind of like, you know what I mean? That
Mm.
that felt like a culturally appropriate way to demonstrate what we already could interpret. There
Mhm.
is a lot of love here. There is a lot of care here. There's no perfection because there's no perfect relationship, but
Mm.
it was just really sweet. And I really
Yep.
liked that a lot.
As you're reflecting on that, if I'm remembering right, when Gogol is with Maxine and later when he's with Mushima, I don't believe they ever say they love each other either, if I recall right. So they, yeah, so right, but yeah, you're right. Ashima and Ashoke, their concept of love demonstrates itself. Whereas, and again, I mean, there's like culture, there's generational things, there's like different personalities. Like with what Gogol and his partners demonstrate, we could wonder, well, is that really love, or is that just infatuation, or is that just like friendship? Um, again, we're looking at here's what seems to be a portrayal of how love and relationship is done in India versus now how Americans do it, and just compare and contrast. And but then you see Gogol, he's now having to navigate those and be like, well, okay, I'm bringing my white girlfriend home. you know, we've already been sleeping together, cohabitating, a whole bunch of things. But oh wait, we're going to my parents. You're meeting my parents for the first time. We can't touch. We can't kiss. We can't be affectionate because that's not how Indians do these things. And for him, it's like he's like kind of like on edge about it. And for Maxine, and I mean, her character portrays some things really brilliantly. As she's like every encounter she has with Indian culture is just like, oh, that's cool. Like, oh, how fun. Oh, how sweet. Oh, what a cool novelty. That's so interesting to me. Which might be like the most supreme like microaggression like we could think of. It's like, oh yeah, your culture has now been reduced to something for my entertainment. Um, which I would venture to say we're at risk for anytime we watch a movie about another culture that's not our own is the risk of just merely being entertained. Yes.
Well, and not to mention,
So
like, oh, I was gonna say, like, through the course of this conversation, even as I describe things, unintentional though I may be, I might contribute to microaggressions. I might contribute to like unfair stereotyping, unfair characterization. But you're right. Like, one thing I noticed is that he gave her like a couple of rules. Like, it's not that intense. Like, don't touch, don't kiss, and I think there was a couple more, all of them broken like within a minute or two. So that, there was that lack of respect. And like you said, it was exemplified with her being like, oh, that's so cute. Like, oh, that's so like, uh, yeah, just patronizing, just kind of a subtle form of condescension where
mhm.
the movie just explored cross-cultural microaggressions like that really well. Like, there was a scene with the naming where, maybe to the doctor's credit, he was just kind of like, it would be easier for you guys. However, and to elaborate a little more, essentially, like Reese was talking about before, what can be common, at least via what the filmmaking was telling us about Indian culture. But what's common is that you essentially enable a grandparent, specifically a grandmother. They didn't say which side of the family, to be fair, or maybe they did, and I missed that part. But you essentially allow the grandmother to name the child, and so that's really sacred, right? It's really important. We got to hold off. But because the white doctor's trying to do his job and probably get to the next patients and next clients, he's like, but we need something in paper now. And so just those little things that, that's one. And then you mentioned with the girlfriend, but it does a really good job of illustrating what those microaggressions are. And the other thing I thought was sort of interesting is the way that Ashok and also Ashima handle those instances even different themselves. Where I feel like Ashok was kind of like, it is what it is. like we gotta find a way to make it out here, right, to survive.
Mhm.
Whereas Ashima's like, no, 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 we are Indian. We are Indian people. We're from India. So there's something about holding on to that we have to
Yeah,
chase and pursue.
yeah, yeah. They presented the contrast really well, and yeah, again, storytelling and cinematography, like the how they use contrast, like Indian culture and American culture, elder generation, younger generation, male versus female. A lot of beautiful contrasts. Bright, warm culture, like cold culture. Uh, so I want to segue a little into talking about identity because that comes up here, and an initial observation, and I'd love your thoughts on this too. So, the way that the different characters portrayed the different aspects. So we could look. So Ashima very definitely embodies tradition. We could say almost to a rigid extent, and um, and I think that word really clicked for me toward the end of the movie. It's after Ashoke has left for teaching, but before he's died, and she's at home alone, like still writing out Christmas cards to everybody, even though her kids don't live with her anymore. Her husband's gone. She's all by herself. Her house is still all festive and decorated, kind of like it always has been. And yeah, her how she how she goes about with her expectations and interacts with culture. It very much has this like, yeah, like you said, I'm Indian and that is not changing. And what is going on with my children and everything. And um, sorry, I have fun with accents. I like playing with accents. I'm not like particularly good at it, and I don't mean any disrespect. It's a fun thing, but maybe I should stop because
I will
uh,
never do them because I don't. I'm not going there. So yep.
okay. Anyway, in this context, it's probably not appropriate. But if Ashima represents rigidity, so then on the other end you have Gogol, who is very very much like chaos. He's very much like, I am rejecting this. I am going to be an American. I am gonna do whatever I want. And at one point he tells Maxine, Maxine's like, don't your parents want you to marry a nice Indian girl? And he's like, I don't care what my parents want. And he's just like kind of all over the place, doesn't know who he is, doesn't really care, doesn't really bond with anyone. And in his life kind of follows that rhythm of like just like a lot of up and down, a lot of emotional extremes. Um, and so Ashoke though, like you've noticed, he seems to embody the divine middle quite a bit more. And maybe it's because of his near death experience. Like he's almost died, he's healed. Uh Kind of the signature moment of the movie is when he's telling his son why he was named what he was. And I'm gonna tear up a little bit because it's just like that is that good. But as he said he tells Gogol like, here's who Gogol was and all of that, but also here's what was happening that night. Like that night, someone was telling me you should go to America, you should go adventure. And I was reading this book, and then the train crash, and like when they show the scene, it looks like most, if not everybody, dies except for Ashoke. Um, and and Gogol asks, he's like, Baba, is that what you think of when you think of me? Like, do I remind you of that night? And Ashoke says, no, you remind me of everything that came after. Every day since then has been a gift. And so, you take a perspective like that, and it kind of buffers you against like these extremes of like rigidity or chaos. Like he's very much able to just be, and to be the calm center, and to be kind of like, like when his son's saying like, I want to change my name from Gogol to Nicole, his dad's able to say like, oh well, I mean, here's what your name means, but it's America, do your thing. And then that's the last that we hear about it. Like he doesn't like pester him about it or anything. So I don't know. I really love the way that they're able to like hit all of those different extremes or those different roles. And again, then you have little sister Sonia, who's just like kind of quietly in the background having a really well balanced life, which I really wish like she'd been in the story a little bit more. But she's just fun. This fun little like thumbnail of like, oh yeah, it is possible to just kind of calmly go about your business and not pick up all of these burdens everywhere. But anyway, those are my brief ramblings about identity. I'm curious, what are some thoughts you have around how identity works?
Yeah, I mean, specifically on that scene where he and um, Gogol are kind of talking about his name and him being like, now that I'm in America, why in the world did you think that this was, you know? And he's like a teen. It's sort of expected, right? That kind of angst. But like you said, the dad's like soft response. He just kind of typified like the very best of being soft. And um, yeah, I was really moved. I thought it's not that his character stole the show, but I just was really, really fixed on him. He kind of reminded me of I don't mean this in a necessarily stereotypical way, but I was getting like, you almost remind me of like an Indian Mr. Rogers. Just this like really sweet, really like, but really thoughtful, really intelligent. Just hitting a lot of different versions of another pod that I eventually want to be doing about masculinity. Just a really healthy in general version of masculinity, but not perfect. And speaking of not perfect, so in that scene where he's talking with his son about the name change, right? And he leans a little on the passive side, a little on the, oh, well, you're going to do what you're going to do. One thing that's really interesting, that shot ends, a shot goes outside, smokes. So clearly that elicited some anxiety, some unresolved feelings. And again, this is something where, as a person of the West, as a white person, I don't know necessarily what emotional expression is going to look like specifically with this Eastern culture. I don't know. So to be fair, maybe that was the most adaptive thing for him to do, but it just felt like clever, again, storytelling, that right after they have that interaction, he felt some kind of way about it, and then he smokes.
Yeah,
So
I thought that was loud and clear as well. Like he's feeling something, and what comes across is he's making the very conscious choice to say very little about it. Uh, which again, good storytelling, good parenting, probably good parenting and everything. So and I like that too, because you could imagine it being a risk for him to like let go of his son in that moment. And I don't know if it's done out of like passivity or if there's like a deep-seated like confidence and hope in there. But the way it works out is, I mean, eventually his son comes back to where he started, and he comes to really value the name and the heritage that that his parents have given him. So the kind of the other thing that really connected to that. So some thoughts on grief and tradition. So apparently in Indian culture there is a tradition around grief, so good for them. In American culture, we don't always have that really well developed. We try to keep ourselves pretty distant from death. Try to sterilize it, not get up close to it. Like 12 years or so when my Lolo died. That's my Filipino grandfather. So I went down and we did the funeral, the memorial, then and the burial, and then here's my huge Filipino family. You could kind of think like if my big fat Greek wedding was set in the Philippines, like that would be my family. So now imagine, instead of all of us going to like a wedding, imagine like like 100 bound people just like pouring into the cemetery, just like hover around as the tractors like digging out the grave and then lowering his casket down into there. And back at the time, I was kind of kind of marveling at the experience of, oh yeah, I'm with a bunch of people that look like me. Like I mean, I'm pretty white passing, but have some Asian features and don't usually notice it. But this time I really noticed like, oh wow, like I look like these people. That's kind of cool. And later I was telling one of my friends about how that went, and they're like, you guys all hung out at the cemetery like the whole time, like everybody? And I was like, yeah, doesn't that always happen? And she's like, no, that never happens. Like, in American culture, like we get away from death as fast as we can. And I was like, oh, okay. And then now here I am, as I'm Eastern Orthodox, and now when someone in our parish reposes, we bring the body like, I mean, cleaned up and everything, but I mean they're part of the service. Like I mean, depending on what day of the week it falls on, I mean, the casket will be in the middle of like the nave, like during liturgy, and we'll just like continue keeping them involved with us in church until they're actually buried. Because we're just like, I mean, we're all going this way too. We're gonna remember it. We're gonna pray for them. So anyway, I'm ranting and rabbit trailing on tradition, but it's really clearly expressed. Like this is a culture that has a tradition, and I think what struck me, and you know, you mentioned so Gogol, you know, shapes his head as part of his grieving process, and it seems like going through the tragedy, the pain of the loss of his father, you know, it's a crisis for him, and what does he do? I mean, he doesn't turn to addiction, from what I can tell, or whatever. Like he returns to his home. He returns to his tradition home, and the he is in a sense he returns to his people, and like that's and that becomes refuge for him. That becomes who he is, and notice that again. It's thinking so. You know, tradition could be done badly. It could be weaponized probably, but there's also some ways where tradition is really beautiful, really life giving. And it seemed like in this story, like that was part of how tradition was portrayed as like as the thing that anchored him. Um, anyway, I've talked a lot. What are your thoughts on like, you know, grief and grieving and tradition and things?
Yeah. So in the same spirit of transparency that you just had, where kind of made you draw on your own grief journey, your own grief experience. So mine is a little bit sooner. So I had my brother pass a little over 3 months ago. So one thing that, yeah, I'll have to focus on mine not getting overwhelmed either. But it was actually really healing to see this and to watch this family grieve and to see another culture grieve. I had this like, oh boy, no, not gonna happen. But I had this moment where I was like, man, this is such a human thing. Like,
Yeah.
we all do it differently, but we all need to do it. And like you said, in the West, we suck at this. We just don't do it. So, you know, within my own personal experience, we kind of, you know, we had the day, celebrated him. But then one of the things that's been kind of difficult for me is, you know, I'm in grief groups, which has honestly been really helpful for me. Um, but you know, I had to go to like some kind of external source, right? Like in Western culture, we like extradite our sorrow or our addictions or whatever our things are, right? The family unit or the church unit or whatever you want to call it, like, we can't handle it. You go figure it out yourself. So one of the things that I think was really moving for me is that, I mean, as far as I can tell, it was an Indian filmmaker, a lot of Indian like people involved with production and acting and all that, right? One thing that's just really beautiful is everyone carries it. Like everyone carries it. So I think that's kind of what, for Gogol, for Sonia, for Ashima, this is why, and then segue to freedom. I think this is why
Yeah.
they felt that sense of freedom, because they weren't bound by the grief, right? So one of the things I feel like happens in Western settings with when someone passes and we're having to deal with it ourselves is it's not really intended for one person to do. That's where we get it wrong. Or even a nuclear family for that matter. It's a whole community that's supposed to hold it. So when we see that and we have a bunch of these different scenes, right? Like they meet at the house and they're all wearing white, right? So I'm assuming that must be specifically something in India, which is beautiful. And then his girlfriend shows him in black. I thought that was funny.
Yeah.
Um, and then the next scene, they were on the water. I think they were in India. I don't actually know for sure, but I'm fairly sure they were in India. And that was the spreading ashes. And then there was this whole process. So it's one of the ways in which rituals and tradition and I know you're gonna love this. You're gonna like this is where I'm gonna launch right into my Orthodox stuff, I'm sure.
Me?
But
Never.
I mean, it wouldn't be this podcast, right? If you didn't do that. It
Right,
makes
right, yeah.
sense. It makes sense. But truly, like, you know, this is where ritual and all these rhythms remind us that we are a part of a one large story. Our sorrow is not our sorrow. Like my brother's passing isn't just mine. Even now, it's partially yours, right? And
Yeah.
even when you were talking about your grandpa, it's partially mine now. Like the whole point is that it's not, grief is not a solitary endeavor. And when we try to make it a solitary endeavor, addiction, depression, like the list goes on.
Yeah.
It's my little soapbox.
I'm right up there with you. I love the way you phrase that. You know, sorrows are not meant to be carried alone. They're not ours to carry alone. And yeah, and this film, this family really depicts that really well. Like, you know, the family comes and they grieve together, and they probably grow stronger because of that. And uh, well, if it were my family, you know, we'd all grieve together, cry together, and then we go like eat and drink and laugh together because the family's together. Let's have a party. So, I mean, that might also be uniquely a Basimio thing. I don't know that other cultures. I don't know that other people are so bombastic as mine. But anyway, um, yeah, this idea though of like we need to be together, like the and then thinking about what freedom is. You know, freedom and tradition. We might not necessarily equate freedom with tradition, but in this sense, it's like the tradition is like having a path versus not having a path, which if you're in the wilderness, like the path is not bondage, the path is liberation because it gives you a way out or it gives you a way to go. Or it's like if the tradition is scaffolding, it's like it's not holding you back, it's helping you build something and everything. And here's where maybe like Mushimi becomes a really interesting depiction of another point of this where um so her brief recounting of herself, you know, having lots of affairs, just like, you know, being the super scholar, super prestigious, having all of her rich friends. Like, I mean, stereotypically, kind of realistically, I mean, I would look at someone caught in that rhythm as, if not already addicted to something, very prone to that or prone to falling into these like compulsive, chaotic, you know, cycles and everything. And that's part of why she leaves Gogol's for her other lovers is, you know, having the sense of like, oh, like, you know, samosas every Thursday from scratch like your mother, and she scorns that because I think she thinks if I don't have to answer to anyone, then I'm truly free. But what ends up happening is she doesn't answer to anyone, and then she ends up alone. Well, she has her lovers for as long as those last, um but she she's going after something that she thinks is freedom, but it doesn't allow her to be with people. And here's where I'll insert my bias and say, so freedom should be something that furthers connection or enables connections, healthy connections, connections with some breathing room that allow for boundaries. You know, not rigidity, but true freedom allows for some movement, but also some anchoring. Not so much movement that I don't have any connections, can't be trusted, can't have intimacy with people. And so in that sense, you know, I would say Mushima doesn't get freedom, where in the ways that Ashima seems like she does. You know, um, she you know she probably remains much closer to her culture than her children does, but you know she begins to allow herself to move and to connect and to be with people in some ways. You know, Gogol again, he comes from this very chaotic, like I don't care about anything, um, and you know, and then he tries maybe moving too close into culture for what will work for him. But then, you know, he kind of seems to find his middle where you know he's in open communion with his mother, he's in good relationship with his sister, he seems to be at peace with his Indian culture, but I mean he's not going to leave America. So he seems to find that kind of connected balance. Uh, yes, that's my notes on freedom.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that her character kind of shows like this is what the West thinks freedom is. This is what, and especially, you know, she serves as such a good contrast for Gokul, and it's really perfect, right, that they like have their little stints, because it seems like for her, trying on the normal way, trying on the traditional way, was something that she wanted to run through, but because she in her life, the connections she made with other people, the meetings she had made along with those people, had become, I mean, to be fair, it's not even necessarily that it's only westernized, but it's also like maybe like secularized, or it's just really like, so, you know, in our modern times, right, in our social media age, a lot of what freedom means is, you know, you sort of have these progressive extremes of it and these conservative extremes of it. Pick your poison, right? But both of those are sort of about like me. How can I be free? Me.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole thing is that like hyper individualism.
Mm.
Whereas, and I guess this will let you know about some of my ideological um, theologians and stuff that I like. But what I really like is Richard Rohr talks a lot about how in his men's work that he does in New Mexico, that's where his parish is. But their big mantra is life isn't about you. And I know it's like, well, duh, but
But not
actually,
necessarily well though, because
yeah.
like I honestly like the default I run into is more of like life is about me, or like I want to be happy, or my other guilty pleasure right now is The Flash because I like superheroes and everything. But like their running central ethic to that whole show is like, oh, Barry Allen, you deserve to be happy just like anybody else, and like that's an ideology and a half, and it shapes a lot of his decisions and like a lot of everybody's decisions, like much different than like I'm part of a community, and if the community is well, I will be well, or I am only as healthy as my community is healthy relative to how much I've invested in it. uh so anyway, yes, our I think a lot of us think life is about us.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I kind of saw in difference between scenes that were shot in India and scenes that are shot in New York. So a lot of what we're afforded in America is um, shielding our eyes from the struggles and strife of our neighbors. So in the Indian shots, right, you're seeing a lot of poverty, and not in a stereotypical way, right? Because I was mentioning before, these are Indian filmmakers. They're just being honest. This is an Indian suburb, right? This is an Indian urban sprawl. They're just showing things as they actually are. But we kind of live in such a way where we can shield ourselves from the plights of others, and then not only that, but plight of ourselves. So then we kind of forget that life at its core, and sometimes I'll tell clients this, and I'll be like, this sounds bleak at first, but follow me. I say, life is suffering. What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? And so I think that that's the film just does a good job with the three mains. And then Sonia, what the heck? Where's Sonia? But their responses, and then, you know, like you said, in the classical Indian way, and the classical Western way, and then this kind of integrated way. How do we go through the normal ebb and flow of life? Suffering's coming for us all. It's here for us all. How are we gonna deal with it?
And we should figure that out because death is not far behind. So yes,
You can see he and I have positive psych in our
right,
in our
yeah,
background. That's very
yeah,
much our wheelhouse.
absolutely, yeah. And but I think you're right though. I mean, we joke about that being bleak, but like that's also reality. And uh taking a mindfulness and sobriety approach to it, like, the more you can interact with what reality actually is as it is without having to run from it, the braver you are, the stronger you are, the more connected you are, the more resilient against things you can be. So we should all face up to what our reality is, and, who we are, where we're at, and everything. Here's what my heritage is. Here's what I like and don't like it about it. Here's this arranged marriage that I'm in. Sure, I'll make the samosas. Which, yes, somebody please make me samosas. I would love some samosas.
Always make samosas if there's an option.
Yes, yes.
Always.
Yes, someday when Caleb comes to visit me in Portland, I will take him to an all-you-can-eat Indian food buffet called
Oh
Namaste.
yes, yes.
It's wonderful, and if any of y'all are with me, we should all go together. Anyway,
Yes.
cool. I'm gonna call it there. I think for for what this interview is. I think I really loved this movie. The first time I watched it, and then like over a decade later, I think also I love coming at it now from an Orthodox standpoint and having a much different relationship with tradition. It just, um, yeah, I mean, especially the scene when they all go to India and the Taj Mahal and like the parents really get to be like, children of ours, here is a tradition, here is a whole world way of life, fully functional that we can offer you, and you can step into it and you can know right away who your home, who you are, where your home is, and like what a beautiful gift. Anyway, uh, and then I think Caleb talking with you has just made me like see even more corners of it and appreciate it even more. So thank you for your thoughts and your feelings.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my closing thought is just on the filmmaking side is you don't need to have needless drama for something to feel dramatic. So there wasn't like storm off, kind of like you said, this kind of like loud storytelling that sometimes we assume is the best storytelling because it's loud. No, the subtle stuff is always where it's at, the slow stuff. Because I really felt for all these characters, I was really moved
Yeah.
throughout the movie. And yeah, I don't think I'll forget it. And we went through this conversation ended deeply existential. And that's kind of a mark of a good movie.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. So yeah, so we highly recommend this. Maybe not with little kids, but generally speaking, highly recommend this for just about all audiences. Really good, thought provoking, really well made. Should become a favorite for everyone. Anyway, thank you for following us. Please do, what is it? Like, rate, review, share the podcast. Also, you can support it at patreon.com/outer circle. And that would be very appreciated. And then that will help us bring you more excellent discussions on excellent movies because we love to do that. And Caleb, again, where can people find you on the internet?
yeah, if you go to Caleb Keller Counseling, I was going to say all C's. No, not Keller. Keller's with a K. But Caleb Keller Counseling, PLLC.net. Yeah, and I do a lot of work with trauma, ASD, specifically spiritual trauma as well. Yeah, and other things like that.
Okay, there you have it. Stay tuned, folks. We'll be back. Like we said, we are reading through Frankenstein, and that is one interesting story. So we'll be back with more fun very soon. All right. Goodbye. Goodbye now.